Have you ever felt that chill crawl up your spine? The kind that has nothing to do with the weather? That icy dread that settles deep in your gut and whispers that something is profoundly, fundamentally wrong? Yeah, that's the kind of story I'm about to share with you. It's not about ghosts or goblins, not about things that go bump in the night in the traditional sense. It's about something far more unsettling, something that can exist right next door, hiding in plain sight. It's about the creeping unease that festers when your safe haven, your home, is infiltrated by a presence you can't understand, can't explain, and can't escape. It's about my neighbors. And believe me, you wouldn't want to live next to them. I've never been one for small talk with neighbors. Maybe it's the city in me, the way we learn to coexist without truly connecting, building invisible walls even when our houses share a street. But this wasn't the city. Fresh out of college, I traded cramped apartments for a fixer-upper house, my own little slice of, well, not exactly paradise. Let's just say the real estate agent glossed over the neighborhood's unique charm. Translation: it was cheap because it was a bit rough around the edges. And by rough, I mean the kind of rough where your car tires might mysteriously deflate overnight and you learn to keep your porch light on all night, every night. But hey, it was mine. And for a guy drowning in student loan debt and ambition thicker than his wallet, mine was enough. The house itself was old, needed work, but had character, or at least potential for it. The yard was overgrown, the paint peeling, but the bones were good, they say. I was ready to pour sweat equity into the place, to transform it into something decent, something homey. What I wasn't prepared for were the neighbors. On one side, I had the music blasters. Stereotype alert, but yeah, it was exactly that. Thumping bass, screeching vocals, the kind of sonic assault that rattled my windows and made me question my life choices at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Annoying, sure, but manageable. Earplugs, polite, yet increasingly strained. Requests to turn it down, I figured I could navigate that. Then there was the other side. Oh, the other side. They weren't loud, not in the music blasting way. They were quiet, quiet and intensely, profoundly unsettling. Two women lived there. One, I'd guess, was in her late 60s, early 70s. She was thin, wiry, with hair the color of dishwater gray pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, etched deep, like they were carved in by worry and time. I'd see her sometimes in the yard, tending to a patchy, half-hearted garden, her movements stiff and jerky. She never smiled, never made eye contact. If I waved, she'd just look through me, like I was a ghost standing on my own porch. The other woman was younger, maybe late 30s, early 40s. She was different, visibly different. There was a vacantness in her eyes, a looseness to her limbs, a disconnect from reality that was palpable even from across the yards. Sometimes, I'd see the older woman, the gray one, struggling to keep her contained. The younger woman, I'd later learn her name was Martha, would have these episodes, full-blown, visceral outbursts, arms flailing, body rocking back and forth, guttural screams tearing through the quiet suburban air. It was disturbing, to put it mildly. Describe escalating creepy incidents, focusing on the narrator's emotions. My front porch became my observation post. I'd sit out there in the evenings, trying to unwind after a long day of work, but my eyes would inevitably drift next door. It was like a morbid curiosity, a train wreck you couldn't look away from. I told myself I was just concerned, neighborly, but deep down, a cold knot of unease was forming in my stomach. One evening, I was out there, trying to read a book but mostly just watching the fireflies blink in the twilight, when it started. The noise. It began as a low moan, barely audible, like a wounded animal whimpering. Then it escalated. Martha, screaming. Not words, not coherent cries for help, just raw, primal screams that clawed at the silence. The older woman, Agnes, I would later overhear her called, was yelling too, her voice tight with a strained, desperate edge. It was a chaotic symphony of distress, echoing through the still night. My initial reaction was to freeze, paralyzed. I just sat there, book forgotten in my lap, listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. Was someone hurt? Was there a fight? Should I call the police? But something held me back. A weird sense of intrusion. Like this was a private nightmare unfolding next door, and I was a voyeur, peeking through the curtains of someone else's pain. The screaming went on and on, for what felt like an eternity but was probably closer to an hour. It was relentless, draining. My neighborly concern finally tipped over into raw, frustrated annoyance. Enough was enough. I was trying to get to bed early for work. I was paying a mortgage in this unique neighborhood. I was entitled to some goddamn peace and quiet, fueled by equal parts annoyance and a sliver of misplaced courage. I marched over to their house. My knuckles rapped sharply against the old wooden door. Silence. For a beat, I thought maybe they hadn't heard me over the din. Then, the door creaked open, just a crack, revealing Agnes's narrow, suspicious face. "What the hell do you want?" she snapped, her voice raspy, tight with tension. Not a hello, not a "can I help you," just pure, unadulterated hostility. I tried to keep my voice calm, even. "Excuse me, I'm your neighbor from next door. I was just wondering if you could keep it down? It's getting pretty late, and some of us have to work in the morning." Polite, reasonable, right? Agnes just stared at me, her eyebrows arching up, her head tilting down in a gesture of blatant disdain, like I was some kind of insect bothering her. Just then, Martha appeared behind her, pushing past Agnes, her eyes wide, unfocused, wild. "How dare you?" she shrieked, the words slurred, distorted by her frantic energy. "How dare you? How dare you? How dare you?" The phrase repeated like a broken record, punctuated by her ragged breathing. Agnes grabbed Martha's arm, pulling her back, her grip surprisingly strong for such a frail-looking woman. Then, without another word, without another glance, Agnes slammed the door in my face. The sound echoed, sharp and final, in the sudden silence. I stood there for a moment, stunned. What just happened? That was bizarre, rude, completely uncalled for, but also strangely effective. The screaming had stopped. The house was quiet. Against my better judgment, against all my instincts for confrontation, I felt a tiny flicker of relief. Maybe that was enough. Maybe they'd gotten the message, in their own weird, aggressively dismissive way. I walked back to my own house, feeling unsettled. Not just annoyed, not just put out, but genuinely uneasy. There was something wrong there. Beyond just being noisy neighbors, beyond just being rude. There was a darkness clinging to that house, a heavy, suffocating atmosphere that radiated outwards, even across the narrow strip of yards separating our properties. The shadow and the scream, escalating fear in the bedroom encounter. I went to bed, but sleep was restless, fitful. The image of Martha's wild eyes, Agnes's cold hostility, the echoing slam of the door, they all played on repeat behind my eyelids. Finally, I drifted off, only to be jolted awake again. This time, it wasn't the screaming from next door. It was silence, an unnerving, absolute silence. Too quiet, like the world had stopped breathing. I glanced at my digital clock, 3 a.m. Still dark outside. Too early to be awake. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks, the lingering adrenaline from the earlier confrontation. I closed my eyes, trying to coax sleep back, willing my racing heart to slow down. But then, I heard it. Faint, at first, a soft scratching sound, like fingernails on wood, coming from downstairs. My bedroom was upstairs, the only room on the second floor. My house was old, definitely prone to creaks and groans, but this was different, deliberate, persistent. The scratching sound continued, growing slightly louder, closer. My heart hammered against my ribs again. Fear. This time, a cold, sharp spike in my chest. Burglar? Animal? My mind raced, grasping for rational explanations, rejecting them just as quickly. I got out of bed, slowly, cautiously, my muscles tense, every nerve ending screaming with alarm. I crept to my bedroom door, listening intently. The scratching stopped. Silence again. Deeper, heavier, even more oppressive than before. Foolishly, maybe, or just driven by a desperate need to know, to understand. I opened my bedroom door, just a crack, peering out into the darkened hallway. Nothing, just shadows stretching long and distorted in the faint moonlight filtering through the window at the end of the hall. I held my breath, listening, straining to hear anything at all. Silence. I told myself I was being ridiculous, paranoid. It was an old house, settling noises, probably just the wind. I was letting my overactive imagination run wild. I was being a fool. I closed the door, firmly this time, and went back to bed, determined to ignore it, to sleep, to just make it to morning. 20 minutes, maybe less. I woke up again. Same oppressive silence. But this time, something else. A feeling, a sense of presence. Like I wasn't alone in the room. The air felt thick, heavy, charged with an invisible energy. My skin prickled, goosebumps erupting all over my arms and legs. I was wide awake now, fear screaming in my veins, every sense on high alert. And then, I heard it again. A sound. Faint, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. A breathing. Close. Too close. Not my own. Hesitant, ragged, right there in the room with me. My breath hitched in my throat. Panic clawed at my insides, a frantic, suffocating terror. I had to see. I had to know. My bedside table. My phone. Source of light. But light. Would light scare it away? Or would it make it worse? My hand trembled as I reached for the phone, fumbling in the dark, my fingers brushing against the smooth, cool glass. Got it. But turn it on? Risk it? My heart was a frantic drumbeat in my chest, deafening in the silence. I took a shaky breath, held it, and flipped the phone on, the screen flaring to life. A weak, inadequate beacon in the inky blackness. I didn't dare turn on the flashlight function, just the dim glow of the screen. I held it up, shielding my eyes, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, scanned the room. Corners. Shadows. Nothing. Just my own furniture, distorted and looming in the dim light. Relief, fleeting and fragile, washed over me. False alarm. Just my imagination running wild. Stupid. Ridiculous. I was about to turn off the screen, laugh at myself for being such a scaredy cat, when I heard it again. The breathing. Closer now. Right next to the bed. And this time, something else. A rustling. Like fabric shifting, brushing against the wall. My gaze dropped, slowly, reluctantly, down, to the edge of the bed, where the wooden frame met the wall. And there it was. A shape, darker than the shadows, a swirling, indistinct mass, pressed against the wall, right at the edge of the bed. A black circle. No, not a circle. A face. A face pressed against the wall, distorted, grotesque, barely human. And then, the light from my phone, however weak, caught it full on. And I saw it. Saw her. Martha. Her face, pressed against the wall, right next to my bed. Her eyes wide, staring, unblinking, pupils dilated to black pools. Her mouth open, a silent scream contorting her features into a mask of pure, unadulterated madness. And then, the scream erupted. Not silent anymore. Ear-splitting, piercing, a shriek of pure, unhinged terror that shattered the silence and ripped through the room, through me. A scream that belonged in a nightmare, in a horror movie, not in my bedroom, not inches from my face. I screamed too. Instinct, pure, primal fear. My scream tangled with hers, a chaotic duet of terror. I recoiled, stumbled back, scrambling away from the bed, from that face, from that sound. I tripped, fell halfway to the door, my phone flying from my hand, the weak light extinguished, plunging the room back into darkness. But I could still see her. Her face, burned into my retinas, the sound of her scream still ringing in my ears. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through me, propelling me forward, towards the door, towards escape. I didn't look back, couldn't look back, just ran, stumbled out of the bedroom, slammed the door behind me, bolted down the stairs, 2 at a time, my feet pounding on the wooden steps, calling the police and its aftermath, confrontation, and a chilling stare. Downstairs. Safety? Not yet. I didn't stop running until I reached the front door, fumbling with the locks, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the doorknob. Finally, I got it open, threw myself out onto the porch, gasping for breath, my lungs burning, my heart threatening to explode. Cold night air hit my face, a shock, a reality check. I was outside. Safe? I slammed the front door shut, bolted it, locked it, chained it, everything I could think of to secure myself inside. Even though inside felt anything but safe anymore. My house, my sanctuary, had been violated, infiltrated, by her, by Martha. I leaned against the door, panting, trembling, trying to get my bearings. What just happened? Was it real? Or some kind of hallucination? A waking nightmare? But the scream, the face, it felt too real, visceral, unforgettable. I had to do something. Call someone. Get help. My phone. Upstairs. No way in hell was I going back up there. Not yet. Not ever. I didn't know. But I had to call the police. From where? My neighbor? No. Absolutely not. Not the music blasters, and definitely not them. Then I remembered my landline. Still plugged in the living room. Old-fashioned, yes, but functional. I stumbled to the living room, my legs feeling like jelly, my body still trembling with residual fear. Found the phone, fumbled with the buttons, my fingers clumsy, numb. Dialed 911. My voice, when I finally spoke, was shaky, thin, barely audible. Police, please, emergency. My neighbor. She's inside my house. The dispatcher, bless her calm, professional voice, managed to extract some semblance of a coherent story from my frantic ramblings. She kept me on the line, asking questions, reassuring me help was on the way. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. Relief, fragile but real, started to seep into my terror-soaked brain. Help was coming. I wasn't alone anymore. The flashing lights filled my living room, painting the walls in pulsing red and blue. Two officers, young, serious, faces grim, knocked sharply on the door. I practically ripped it open, letting them in, my words tumbling out in a rush, trying to explain, to make them understand, to validate the terror that was still clinging to me like a shroud. They listened, their expressions skeptical at first, but then, as they took in my wide eyes, my trembling hands, my frantic energy, something shifted in their faces. They started to believe me, or at least, believe that something seriously wrong had happened. Show us where, one of the officers said, his voice firm, authoritative. He gestured towards the stairs. My stomach lurched. Go back up there? Now? With her? Still up there? But they were here. They were with me. I wasn't alone. Courage, borrowed from their presence, from their uniforms, from the flashing lights outside, flickered within me. I led them upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest, each step heavy, hesitant. The hallway was dark, silent. My bedroom door, still closed, still solid. The officer drew his weapon, a slow, deliberate movement that amplified the tension in the air. He nodded to his partner, who positioned himself to the side of the door. Then, the first officer, with a swift, decisive motion, kicked the door open. We rushed in, weapons drawn, adrenaline surging. Empty. The room was empty, except for the open window. Wide open, curtains billowing in the night breeze, the cool air sweeping through the room, chasing away the residual heat, the lingering presence. She was gone, vanished, into the night. The officers searched the room, methodically, professionally, under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains, everywhere. Nothing, just my overturned bedside lamp, my scattered phone, the rumpled sheets on the bed, and the open window. She's gone, the officer said, holstering his weapon, his voice still cautious, but slightly less tense. Likely went back to her own house. Her house. Next door. Right next door. The cold knot of fear in my stomach tightened. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Just then, a knock at the front door. Downstairs. Agnes. I knew it. even before the officer went down to open it. She stood on my porch, framed in the doorway, her face impassive, her eyes hard. Behind her, I could see other neighbors, drawn by the commotion, peering from their porches, curious, concerned. Agnes spoke, her voice surprisingly calm, almost pleading. "Officers," she said, addressing them, ignoring me completely. "You must be mistaken. Martha, she wouldn't hurt anyone. She gets confused sometimes. She wanders. She didn't mean any harm." The officer who had been in my bedroom came back downstairs. "Ma'am," he said, his voice polite but firm, "we received a call. Your ward, Martha, was found inside this residence. Uninvited. That's trespassing. We need to take her in." Agnes's face hardened. "No," she said, her voice sharp, defiant. "You won't. She's unwell. She needs to be home. With me." "Ma'am, we understand, but we have to follow procedure. We just need to take her in for the night, assess the situation, make sure everyone is safe." "Safe?" Agnes scoffed, her eyes flicking towards me for the first time. A flicker of pure, venomous hatred in their depths. "She's the danger here?" Her stare pinned me to the spot, cold, accusatory, filled with a malevolence that chilled me to the bone. The officer turned to me. "Sir," he said, "do you want to press charges? Against Martha?" Press charges? Against Martha? The mentally ill woman who'd invaded my house, terrified me half to death? Logically, rationally, yes. Of course. That's what you're supposed to do. Protect yourself. Set boundaries. But those eyes, Agnes's eyes, that stare, it wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, darker, a promise of retribution, a silent threat, and pity, a strange, uncomfortable pity for Martha. She was clearly unwell, lost, trapped in her own world of confusion and terror. Was pressing charges going to help anything? Or just make things worse? For everyone? I hesitated. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. Agnes's stare bore into me, unwavering, unforgiving. "No," I finally managed to croak out. "No charges." The officer nodded, his expression unreadable. "Okay," he said, "but we still need to take her in for the night. For her own safety and yours." Agnes didn't argue further. She just stood there, watching, as the officers led Martha out of her house. Martha docile now, strangely quiet, her vacant eyes staring straight ahead, seeing nothing. As they walked Martha towards the police car, Agnes's gaze remained fixed on me. That stare, evil, hateful, a silent vow of vengeance. They drove Martha away, the police car pulling away from the curb, the flashing lights fading into the distance. Agnes turned, slowly, deliberately, her eyes still locked on mine, and walked back to her house. Her own house, next door. 5 minutes later, I saw her car start up in the driveway. She backed out, pulled into the street, and drove away. Vanished, just like Martha, into the night, leaving me alone. In my house, next to nothing, and everything. Everything that was wrong, everything that was unsettling, everything that was terrifying, still hung in the air, thick and heavy. A suffocating presence that wouldn't dissipate, wouldn't leave me alone. Unresolved fear and a lingering sense of doom. Open ending. They came back. Of course they came back. How could they not? They lived next door. Agnes returned the next day, her face still set, her eyes still hard, but different. Colder, somehow. More distant. She didn't acknowledge me, didn't even glance in my direction as she went about her day, tending her pathetic garden, sweeping her porch, just existing. But the stare from the night before, the chilling, hateful glare, it was still there, imprinted on my memory, a constant, unsettling reminder. Martha was back too, seemingly unchanged, still lost in her own world, still prone to outbursts, but quieter now, subdued, like something had been broken in her. Or maybe contained. Agnes kept her close, I noticed, always within arm's reach, always watchful, her eyes sharp, alert, constantly scanning, assessing, and always, those eyes would flick towards my house, towards my windows, towards me, whenever I dared to step outside. Life went on, or at least a semblance of it. I went to work, came home, ate, slept, or tried to, repeated. But everything felt different, tainted. My house, once my sanctuary, now felt exposed, vulnerable. Like the walls weren't quite solid, like the windows weren't quite closed, like they could get in again. Anytime. I started locking all the doors, all the windows, every night, triple-checking them before I went to bed, and then checking them again and again, just to be sure. I installed a security system, cameras, motion sensors, floodlights, turning my little fixer-upper into a veritable fortress. Paranoid? Maybe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to be protected from them. Sleep became even more elusive. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, every unexpected sound sent my heart racing, my body tensing, my senses on high alert. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening, waiting. For what? Another scream? Another face at the window? I didn't know, but the fear was always there, a constant, gnawing presence in the back of my mind. One night, a few weeks later, I was sitting on my porch again, trying to recapture some sense of normalcy, some semblance of peace. The fireflies were blinking again. The crickets were chirping. The night air was warm and still, almost idyllic. If you ignored the knot of dread twisting in my gut, if you ignored the constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had become my new normal, if you ignored them, I glanced over at their house, almost involuntarily. Dark. All the windows were dark, no lights on, no movement, no sound. Unusually quiet, even for them. Agnes and Martha were usually active, in their own strange way, even late into the night. But tonight, nothing. I told myself it was a good thing. Peace and quiet. What I wanted, right? But the silence felt wrong. Ominous. Like the calm before a storm. Or worse, like they were waiting, watching, planning. Suddenly, a flicker of movement at one of their windows. Upstairs window. Bedroom window? Hard to tell in the dark. But someone was there, standing in the shadows, behind the glass, looking out, watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my skin prickling with goosebumps. I couldn't make out who it was, just a dark shape, indistinct, barely visible in the darkness. But I knew it was her, Agnes, watching me. Again, her eyes, unseen but felt, boring into me, across the yards, across the darkness, across the space separating our houses. I wanted to look away, needed to look away, but I couldn't. I was frozen, locked in her gaze, held captive by her unseen presence, by the unspoken threat hanging in the air between us. We stayed like that, motionless, silent, staring across the darkness, two figures locked in a silent, invisible battle of wills, a chilling standoff in the quiet suburban night. And then she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hand. Not a wave, not a friendly gesture. Something else. Something deliberate. Something purposeful. She pointed, not at me, not directly, but towards my house, towards me. A slow, deliberate point, her finger extended, unwavering, a silent accusation, a chilling warning, a threat. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the movement stopped. The hand lowered. The dark shape retreated from the window, vanished, leaving only darkness, silence, and me, sitting on my porch, frozen to the spot, my heart hammering against my ribs, my blood running cold, watching, waiting, knowing, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It was just beginning, and I had no idea what was coming next. But I knew, deep down, with a primal, instinctive fear, that it wouldn't be good. Not good at all. And that, my friends, is where I am now. Sitting here, waiting, listening, wondering, what happens next? Wow, that was intense, right? Writing this all out, reliving it, it's brought back all those feelings, that constant unease, that creeping fear. Honestly, even now, Just thinking about Agnes and Martha sends a shiver down my spine. There's something about that house, about those women, that just isn't right. And the fact that they're still living next door, it's hard to shake that feeling of being watched, of being targeted. I know some of you might be thinking, move, just move away. And trust me, that thought has crossed my mind more than once. But it's my house now. I've put work into it, money into it. And honestly, part of me is just too stubborn to be driven out by them. But another, bigger part of me is genuinely terrified. So, what do you think? What should I do? Have you ever experienced anything like this with neighbors? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more, if you want to find out what happens next, because trust me, I have a feeling this isn't the end of the story, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment asking for part 2. If there's enough interest, I'll definitely keep sharing my neighborly adventures. And who knows, maybe together we can figure out what the hell is going on next door. Thanks for listening, and wish me luck. I think I'm going to need it.